If I could offer one thing before we get started, if you have a hard time hearing, this is as good as it's going to get. Just move closer if you can't hear too well.
And also,
No
in the presentation, we're going to have some pictures I'm going to pass out when he tells me to. So I'm going to have 2 copies and kind of go either direction and all that.
I don't see Brenda.
Brenda's not going to be able to make it. She had a fall on Monday and she's having a hard time walking right now.
Oh, okay. Well, then she's the official for all this, so we'll just get started. Welcome to the Main Cross Street Walking Tour, May the 5th, 2019, sponsored by the Fleming County Covered Bridge Museum. In preparing for this, I thought about 6 different ways to do it. Couldn't settle on one, so I'm just going to meld parts of each one of them into the entire presentation. One thing is, there's a section I've prepared for buildings between 1941 and 1951. That's because I moved here as a 7-year-old from Mason County in 1941 and lived here and went to school here in 3 different buildings until I left for college, University of Kentucky in 1951, so I can relate during those war years and the years afterwards as to what was going on here at that time. And then in 1998, when my wife and I were on a vacation in Florida and I had a new laptop, I thought, I think I'll try to recall, as of today, 1998, the buildings in downtown Flemingsburg, which would be Main Cross and Water Street. I also have access to an insurance map that was made in 1898, which was for their underwriters, and they had taken the original diagram of Flemingsburg, of the streets, and measured each building area-wise and height-wise, and then mentioned what would be needed to get to the top of that building if it caught on fire, and that way they could adjust your insurance rates based on that. So that's a benefit, because 1898, I have no idea what was in any building. But preliminarily, I'll tell you that Flemingsburg was originally laid out on the town square plan. And that was, the courthouse was the center. And the east and west streets were called Main Street. So the north and south streets crossed Main Street, so that section was called Main Cross Street. Well, we have Eastwater, which would be to my left, Westwater, which would be to my right. South is as I face, and north would be behind me. Well, they did a pretty good job because on Main Street, that is East Main, and that's West Main, and that's South Cross. But North Cross really should be from the courthouse toward Mount Carmel. No, it's not called that. It's called Mount Carmel Avenue, and so sometime or other, decided from Water Street up to the courthouse would be North Main Cross. So that's what we deal with. Well, this is what I wrote down some time ago. Starting out on the left-hand side of Mount Carmel Avenue, the first thing I remember in business-wise, that was the Watts Farm. And there is now a mobile home park there. And then this side of the mobile home park, Randall Company came in and started a business there. And then it became Textron, then it became Palma, Tenement. Now it's Raymond, the French outfit there. So that's what a business that is on that area now. But that place back to 1941 and through 51. During that period of time, it was still the Watts Farm. Mr. John Watts owned that. He lived out on Mount Carmel Avenue. But one significant thing about Mr. John Watts is, as you turn right to go back into the City Hall, you'll see 2 square stone posts. He was a stonemason, and he built those posts over 100 years ago. And he also was the brick mason and stonemason for the foundation of the Carlisle Courthouse. The reason I know that is one of my teachers and a librarian when I was in high school was Miss Nancy Watts. Her father, Mr. John Watts, and she's the one who told me that, so I believe it's probably 100% true. Well, as you come on in on the left-hand side of Mount Carmel Avenue, going back now in the 41-51 period, Pete Berry, who owned the Standard Oil distributorship here, built a service station. It was called the Standard Oil Service Station. In those days, it was operated by Albert Maxey, and then later by Carlos Porter, and then some of you remember when Frank Newman operated it, followed by Gary Conley, and then Terry Bernard now has a tire shop. Well, there's nothing this side of that until you get to the Catholic Church, and it was St. Charles Borromeo was built in 1859. And then you come to this building, which is our law office, but it's been there since in the 1830s or 40s, and at one time a lawyer named Landolph Watson Andrews occupied it as his law office, and he later was circuit judge. The Catholic manse 2 doors down was the home of Mrs. Cullen, and she sold it to the bishop of the Catholic Church of this diocese, and that title is still in the bishop's name. The next building was William H. Fisher Sr. Home, and his brother Dan T. Fisher occupied this building. And as I told you last year in September, Dan T. Fisher's jewelry store was downtown and is no longer in existence. Interesting man. He was very involved in things in Flemingsburg. Not only was he a jeweler, he built what's called the Fisher Building now. He was also an optician. He also learned the art of engraving scenes in teaspoons, and he invented the sewing machine, had a sewing machine shop, and sold sewing machine oil in a bottle shaped like a fish. So he lived in this house. One thing that I was thinking about in those early days was how varied and how complete Flemingsburg was. In an interview I gave earlier this year, I said that when people ask me where I'm from and I tell them Flemingsburg, they oftentimes say, I don't know where that is, or I've never been there. And I said, well, if you aren't going there, you probably aren't going to go through there either, because we're halfway between Maysville and Moorhead, and that's why where we're located. But truthfully, we have been fairly self-supporting as a town from the very beginning. All of the different businesses that you need in a community, Flemingsburg had it. We had doctors and lawyers and dentists and opticians. We had grocery stores, hardware stores. Well, I made a list of the stores that we don't have now. You know, they're few. So we don't have a laundry. We don't have a dry cleaners. We don't have home cooking food in restaurants. We don't have small grocery stores. We don't have a men's clothing store or shoe store. We do not have a woman's clothing or shoe store. We do not have any department stores, Bakers and Lerman's primary examples. We don't have any jewelry stores. We don't have any watch repair stores. We used to have 2 locally published newspapers. We have newspapers now, but they're not locally published. We had appliance stores. We had 2 separately owned drugstores. We had a movie theater, had a bakery, a furniture store, we had a number of pool rooms and dress shops, and you know, all those things you didn't have to go out of town for any of your necessities. They were right here. Now you go to, may as well to Kroger's, or you go to Walmart, or you go to Lowe's, or all those things. And another thing I remembered when we were going down, and I'll mention one of these as we start down Courthouse Hill, cream stations. Now some of you younger people have no idea what a cream station is. That's when everybody milked a few cows on the farm and brought the milk in, let it sit overnight, and then the lady of the house skimmed the cream off the top and put it down a little round bucket with a push top lid on it. And when they came to town on Saturday to get their groceries and do their shopping, they'd go to the cream station, and the person operating would take a little scoop out of that, put it in their centrifuge, let it spin and figure out what the butter fat was, and then pay you for your cream. And she usually hoped to get enough money that she could go to the grocery store then and buy her groceries. If that wasn't enough, some of them brought farm fresh eggs in, and you could trade those to the stores. Or there was a Henderson's Poultry House. You could take them down there and sell them to him. Of course, he would send them on to other places that needed large supplies of eggs. So today, here's what we have to take the place of a lot of these businesses. We have Tire World, which is tires and auto service. We have Napa Auto Parts. We have Dollar General, Family Dollar, Ace Hardware, and 2 large grocery stores. And so that's what we've been reduced to over the years, because businesses went out of business. Okay, let's get back to where we are. And the yellow building over there, that was originally built in 1910 by General Evans. I don't think he ever lived there. Why he built it, I'm not really sure. He lived in Mercer County, owned a large 200-acre tract of land out in the county, but he built that, and then it had several owners after that who lived there. But one of the things that I have called that building is the seminary building. You realize that for a long time in Kentucky, there were no public schools. All schooling was done by private individuals in private areas. And so there was a school there, and they would elect the trustees by ballot, but then later on, even the superintendent of schools was elected. We still have elected school board members, but at the same time, they hire the superintendent. Well, this was a seminary for about 40 years, and that's where you had to pay to have your child sent to school there. And about 1870, they had some legislation in Kentucky that provided for some public schools, and so that ceased being a seminary. It's a fancy name for school, but that's what they called them in those days. Well, following that, it was a private residence, and the one I remember after that was a man named Thomas J. Hinton. He was a carpenter. In those days, you didn't have funeral homes as such, but you had someone who was called an undertaker, and they usually made caskets. They would furnish a casket to the family, and in those days also, they didn't embalm, so you died one day, and they got you ready for burial, cleaned you up, dressed you, put you in this wooden box, and had the funeral the next day. And the funeral was oftentimes in the private home. Well, I'll tell you later about a business downtown toward the fire department, where the fire department used to be. It was hand printing. And so when someone died, one of the first things or second things they did, they would go to that printing office, and they'd have a piece of paper about that size, and the border would be in black. It would be announcing that the funeral of so-and-so who died at a certain time would be held at the residence of so-and-so. the next day at 4 o'clock. And this was your invitation to come to the funeral. I guess it was more of an announcement but it was considered an invitation. And so Mr. Hinton had a business of furnishing caskets and that sort of thing for a number of years. Well, later on, that building was occupied by people for the same purpose. McClure's bought it, and they had a funeral home there. And then Frank Boone bought it and had a funeral home there for a short period of time. He and his wife, Evelyn, lived in the upstairs apartments, which had been built by the McClure family. And then when he ceased having any funerals there, went down to where Boone Nickel is now, and Frank and Evelyn continued to live there. Then she opened the antique shop on the first floor, and it became known as the Bright Spot. Well, the reason it was a bright spot was because a lawyer named Mr. Oliver Lander Bright, lived there for a number of years, and so they went back and picked up the name Bright because they lived there for so long. And then the building, which was torn down on the corner, and you see a grassy spot now, that was also built before 1850, and was on Courthouse Square here. And over the years, it was occupied as a bank. David Wilson had a bank there. Doctors had offices in that same room. It was the room nearest the intersection. And before it was torn down, you could look over there and see that where the window in the corner was actually had been bricked up from the bottom, and you could tell it used to be a door. And so the door into that room was the David Wilson Bank for a while. And then Dr. J.S.C. Bryce had his medical office there. And Dr. Aiken, who came in from Sherburne and practiced medicine here, he also occupied that for a period of time. His son, Morris Aiken, became a druggist. He and Charlie Bryce Emmons had a drugstore on the corner of Water Street later on, and then they dissolved that partnership. Charlie Bryce stayed there, and Morris Aiken came over on the right-hand side as you go down above the bank. And actually, I'll tell you later when we get down there, but that drugstore was in the area called the dining room for the Merchants Hotel. Well, let's see where I am now. Oh, behind you where the sheriff's office is now, it used to be the health department. That was the home of the Fisher unmarried sisters. They were sisters, William H. Fisher and Dan Fisher, and they had their home here. They lived together, and of course the Fisher family had accumulated money and didn't spend much, so they didn't have to have employment anywhere, but they were seamstresses. So people took their sewing needs to them, and that's how they made a little extra money. When the second one died, the county bought that lot, and the health department was built. Well, let's walk down toward the old hotel, and we'll talk about the courthouse and about some of the buildings on that side.
That's okay, just keep talking.
You would have thought they would, wouldn't you? That's far enough. still on Courthouse Square, and so if you look directly across, which is now the insurance building, and at the top of the plaque says Foreman Building. In 1869, that building was built for the clerk's offices, or offices for the county officials, and on the left, as I recall it back in the 40s, on the left was the county clerk's office, and Frank Boone was the county clerk. And on the right, the county judge had his office in the front, and behind the county judge's offices were two more large rooms, and they were the circuit clerk's offices. Well, we look at the courthouse, which Daniel's passing out pictures now. The old courthouse was very near and dear to me, but I was in the minority and too young to know about it. That courthouse was built in 1929 by the premier house and building contractors, Samuel Stockwell and James Eccles. Samuel Stockwell was known as the house joiner, and James Eccles was the brick mason. Each of them had a large number of slaves who worked for them and fashioned all of the woodwork and all of the brick and all the foundation stones involved in their buildings. The 1829 courthouse had a cupola, had a tower, had a bell tower, and a spire on top of that. It was one large room, and the stairways were on each side, not the front like it is now. In the upstairs, there were 3 large rooms on each side, which had been provided for county offices. There was one for the grand jury, one for the pettit jury, one for the county attorney, and there was a stairway in the back of the building to access them. In the 1940s, there was no access to those upstairs rooms from the inside because in the, the northeast corner, there was a stairway which had been closed up and boxed off. If any of you ever were in that building, you realized you looked over the corner and there was a boxed off area, and the floor sloped as beside that partition, and that was the access. But those offices were never used during my recollection from 41 on. The building behind me was the property valuation administrator's office, and so it's now in the basement of the 52 courthouse. And Miss Allie Talbert lived in this house. And that was one thing I was going to say, is with all of these businesses we're going to hear about today, interspersed among them were residences. People lived as their principal residence in buildings in between businesses. Not their business necessarily, that's just where they lived. And so I'll tell you as best I can about that. Where that parking lot is, deeded, the Gormans bought it at one time, and then it was deeded to the city, and it's a city parking lot now. But in 1941 and during the 1940s, it was a 2-story red brick building, and on the corner was the sheriff's office. And just below it was a residence that people, families lived in. And going straight back toward the Gorman building, the first one that I remember was Walton's shoe shop, shoe repair shop. There's always been shoe repair shops in Flemingsburg until I forgot who the last one was, but it was on Courthouse Hill. Yeah, Honaker. And the Honaker family and the Walton family both were shoe repair people. But on the far end of it was Howard McCartney's law office, and he was county attorney. And those rooms were occupied until they tore the building down a number of years later, I think in the 70s. But prior to that, they looked in the basement under the sheriff's office, and they found a still, which had been confiscated by the sheriff's department sometime in the past, but no one bothered much to go down there and look for it, so it sort of surprised everybody when they went under and found that copper still under the sheriff's office. Well, the next thing which we talk about, I'm glad it's still here, and that's the Fleming Hotel. Let me find my notes. As I say, the town was laid out in the very beginning, before any buildings were built onto the lawn. And all the lots were measured, and they were all numbered. And so those numbers still exist in some of the deeds. And this corner lot was lot number 32. It was actually purchased initially by my ancestor Richard Tilton, but he didn't build anything on it. He sold it for profit, and that's why he bought it. And initially there was a one-story frame house and store. Now whether they ran the store and lived there both, I don't know, but the deed says it was a house and a store. It was sold again in 1809, 1813, and 1829, but then in 1837, a man named John Ware, he spelled it W-E-I-R. It looked like Weir, but they pronounced it Ware. And John Ware built a hotel. That was in 1837. In 1882, the deed says the Ware Hotel property was sold to John O'Sullivan, and his wife Amanda ran the hotel, and later on it was sold to Lewis Bright, and it was known as the Bright Hotel. And then in 1919 it was sold to Hugh and Betty Fleming, and then it became known as the Fleming Hotel, and they both eventually died and left the property to their daughter, Anna Mae Fleming, who married a man named Foxworthy, and they lived there. And it was a fairly good convenience for people coming into Flemingsburg, because back in those years there were still drummers or salesmen who came through to sell wares to the merchants, and they would stay all night in the hotel. They also had a dining room there. And I do know that in that period of time, in the 30s and the 40s, the Lions Club met there every Thursday night, and the hotel personnel prepared a meal for their meeting. The greatest significance about this building now is that historical sign that says James J. Andrews. James J. Andrews was involved in some espionage during the Civil War. He came to Flemington County in 1859. I don't know how he arrived, whether he walked in, rode a horse, or what, but he arrived in 1859 and occupied the room upstairs where you see the lamp in the window. He supposedly was a house painter and was a musician, and he wanted to get a job as a teacher, but he didn't get the job. He did become attracted to a woman named Elizabeth Layton, and they picked a marriage date in 1852. But prior to that, the Civil War broke out after he was here, and he conceived out that if he could go to Atlanta, there was a railroad,